Thank you, Peter. Our next session of the day is boosting the grid with battery storage. So I'd like to invite our panelists for session 2 to come on up, as well as our moderator for the session, Gina Bokra of WSP.
So nice to see everybody here. Ah, that's better. Great. I'm Gina Bokra with WSP, engineering consulting firm where we have a team that works on energy, decarbonization, climate, to deliver future-ready buildings, future-ready places across the United States. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you to Urban Green for inviting me to join you and assemble with these wonderful panelists. I was a little confused at first when I was asked to come join you because I am not a battery expert. I work with some really amazing battery experts, and thankfully they did a little bit of work to help me prep, so I appreciate that. And I want to just give a little bit of background and kind of set sort of landscape for us to have a conversation. And I want to share a few things that I have learned about battery storage, energy storage recently that I am really grateful to have the opportunity to recharge my own excitement about this. So with CLCPA and Local Law 97, obviously we've been talking for several years now about electrification in buildings. There's a bit of a few things that we need to do, as Joe said, before we do all of that electrification. We need to eliminate energy waste in buildings, if at all possible. We need to lower all of those energy loads and manage them better. And we need to transition to, in the case of buildings, mostly all electric operations. But the other thing that we haven't talked about so much is that those buildings really need to behave differently on the grid. And so buildings can no longer, in the grid of the future, be these passive end consumers on the grid. They need to take on a different role, and distributed energy resources are really crucial to that transition that we're going to go through. So I want to share a couple of points first of some things that help me put all of this into context. I actually want to go back to Thomas Edison, because in the beginning, Thomas Edison actually didn't subscribe to the idea that batteries would be practical energy storage at any time in the future. He started the grid that Con Edison has been building over 150 years now. The city and the state started working on battery policy a little over 10 years ago. And it feels like it's kind of moving like molasses. But I'm really excited to have had the opportunity to have this conversation, because it's really not. And it's really, I'm very optimistic now. Looking at some data that came out of at Columbia's business school, there's a professor that said 20 years ago, batteries would only be suitable for appliances, small appliances. You all have these little batteries in your pockets probably. And that's not the case today. The current lithium ion capacity in the United States is about 1% what we need it to be, just 1%. Our technology of today has some limitations, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but there are some really positive changes that are about to happen. And so there are some trends that I want to just share to set the stage. The technology is generally accepted as moving in the right direction. We're going towards longer battery discharge, better round-trip efficiencies, longer life, more affordable, safer, increased battery lifespan. So the batteries that we see today are probably going to outlive the cars that they're in for EVs. The cost is going to keep coming down and reducing total cost of ownership. There's improved energy density. They're smaller, they're lighter. There's reduced charging time. New chemistries, technologies. AI is going to be very important, so I hope you'll hear a little bit more about that. But they're really crucial in modernizing our grid. And so joining me today, John Romano from Con Edison. John, you've been working on distributed energy resources for about 20 years now, almost. Daniela Leifer, she's the New York City Energy Storage Ombudsman with Sustainable CUNY. Molly Raffleson, Program Director of Energy Storage at the Clean Fight. Both of you are working on advocacy, education, and trying to help service providers to get the hold that they need in the market. And Claudia Villar-Lehmann. Claudia was with the mayor's office and is now at New York Best. So I want to start off, Claudia, if you don't mind. Can you talk generally about the primary benefits of energy storage? And before we bother John with the same question, can you talk about what those benefits are for owners if they were able to join those bleeding edge owners that have installed behind the meter?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gina, for setting that excellent framing, and to Urban Green for inviting me to participate today, and honestly for having an entire panel dedicated to energy storage at a building conference. I was very excited to see that. Very happy to have our kind of clean energy grid-focused worlds colliding with the building service providers world. So energy storage is an incredibly exciting technology. It's kind of like the unsung hero of the clean energy transition. So we heard a lot about the need for electrifying buildings, electrifying transportation, absolutely critical. But of course, all of that electricity generated to fuel those new products needs to be 100% clean. And in order to achieve 100% clean electricity, we know we cannot do it without energy storage. And I think that message hasn't been as loudly broadcast. The general public is aware we need solar, we need wind, we need these renewable generation sources. But most people, when I say, oh, I work in energy storage, they say, what's that? So there's a huge opportunity here to kind of refocus the conversation on the benefits that energy storage can provide. So we like to think of energy storage kind of like a Swiss Army knife. There's lots of different tools, lots of different benefits that it can provide depending on the use case and depending on the size. So there's energy storage that can provide services directly to buildings, and then the size is modular, so it can scale up all the way to kind of power plant size systems that serve the transmission grid. I think when I talk to people about energy storage, sometimes the first idea of what the benefit could be is backup power. So I, for example, have a lot of family in Puerto Rico. After Hurricane Maria 2017, they didn't have power for 10 months, and that wasn't uncommon on the island, and they still have multi-day blackouts frequently. So that has generated a lot of interest in solar plus storage as backup power solutions, to the point where we see over 10% of residential households in Puerto Rico with solar and storage, which is much higher than the national average. So there can be a backup power play for energy storage, particularly in grids that are less reliable. Fortunately, here in New York City, we are lucky to have a very reliable grid where power outages are not very common at all. So having battery storage just play the backup power role probably doesn't make a lot of financial sense, because most of the time the battery will be sitting there unused until like the one unique scenario where the power does go down. So instead of thinking of batteries as backup power for a building if the power goes out, it's kind of like backup or resiliency services to the grid to prevent it from going out, to reduce the likelihood of brownouts or blackouts in the future. And batteries can do that by lowering peak demand, by providing demand response services, by basically serving as a load modifier sited very close to load, which is, for the building itself. There's also huge emissions benefits associated with energy storage by helping reduce our reliance on peaker plants, and so being able to harness all of the public health benefits that come with that. And so to explain that a little bit, basically the emissions intensity of our grid varies dramatically based on the time of day and also the time of year. So the resources or the generating plants, the fossil fuel plants that we are relying on to produce our electricity kind of trade in and out depending on the whether demand is high or low. So the idea of energy storage being able to play the role of arbitrage, the concept there is buy low, sell high, similar to Wall Street. So you're charging up the battery when prices are low, and that's, when demand is low, you're using the cleanest, least expensive resources to charge up the battery. And then when demand spikes and we have to rely on these really expensive, really dirty power plants to come online, the battery can discharge at that time to offset the need for that, either by discharging to the grid or providing power to the building to prevent them from needing to draw on the grid at that time. So that's providing emissions benefits that can turn into financial benefits as well, especially through Local Law 97 and helping to reduce Local Law 97 fines by reducing your reported emissions from electricity on your Local Law 97 report. It can also help directly reduce your electricity bill by lowering demand charges because you're reducing peak demand, and that's especially powerful for buildings with a really peaky load profile. Energy storage can provide property tax abatement benefits. So there's lots of different ways that building owners can benefit directly from having a battery. And then I guess collectively, modeling has shown, so NYSERDA has done a lot of modeling and the state has adopted, really exciting, 6 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030 statewide. And according to the NYSERDA modeling, if we achieve that, we can avoid about $2 billion in overall electric system costs. And so that also kind of is reflected in lower rates and in support of a more affordable energy transition overall.
Thank you, Claudia. So there are a lot of benefits for owners, and we have to see batteries at all different scales. And you mentioned the events that happened in Puerto Rico. There are also these events that happened in Texas. General public says, we can't transition to an all-electric grid because bad things happen. And you also mentioned we have the luxury in New York City of one of the most reliable grids in the United States. And so that's reliability and stability is mission number one for Con Edison. So John, can you talk to us a little bit about how energy storage is going to continue to support that reliability and stability, and how do you imagine energy, both in front of the meter and behind the meter energy storage, playing that role in the transition that Con Edison is going to see on the grid over the next few decades?
Thank you, Gina. Great question, and I'll build off on a lot of Claudia's talking points. So from a utility perspective, we've heard a lot of folks talk today about electrification and the clean energy transition. And there are many challenges associated with that. And as we think through what those are, in my mind, the number one priority is to not compromise reliability. How do we get through that transition without sacrificing reliability for all of our customers? And energy storage has a very important role to play. When we think about some of those challenges at the macro level, we have to think about all of the load that's coming on the system. How do we plan for the cooling load that drives our summer peaks today? How do we plan for, in a near future, the heating loads in the winter and deal with a winter peak system? And energy storage is critical to that. I love the Swiss Army knife expression. I think that perfectly sums up what it is. So from a utility and a grid planning perspective, it is the most versatile tool at our disposal. It could do whatever the grid needs. And I think most importantly, as we go through the transition and things change over time, how we use that energy storage can change. How we think about most of it today is summer peaks and energy arbitrage, and that'll change. We can dispatch that storage for those macro level peaks on hot summer days. We can also dispatch it for very granular and micro-level issues when there's contingencies or for outage and resiliency support. So from a grid planning perspective, CLCPA has some lofty goals for energy storage, and ultimately the utility is the backstop. So we have to think as we go forward, how much of this materializes, how do we plan for our grid, how do we run different scenarios and different models to make sure that we ensure we keep that reliability and we accommodate all these resources and we appropriately advocate for the DERs and the different technologies coming on the grid to help us get through the transition.
Thanks, John. Danielle, I'm going to come to you next. How many installations are there in New York City now? You've been playing a role at CUNY to help owners navigate these kinds of decisions. And what do you know about the pipeline? What are the policy changes that are going to help drive growth?
Sure. So in my role as Energy Storage Ombudsman, I work a lot with sort of one foot in the realm of developers, installers who are trying to understand and navigate the process, regulatory processes, installation policies, things like that for getting these projects built and sited. And one foot also working with the regulators whose responsibility it is to establish safe and comprehensive, installation policies so that we get the batteries done right. We don't want to make costly or harmful mistakes with, deploying batteries at scale. So that said, I'm coming at this from that sort of, very nuts and bolts installation regulation perspective. So a little bit of just a snapshot of kind of where the battery market is right now in that sense. That would be helpful just to kind of set the stage and as well as looking out at what else needs to happen in order to continue working towards our goals. Right now, there is the bulk of the battery market in New York City consists of the really large kind of utility scale front-of-meter projects. There was a really big leaps in the interconnection queue that indicates early project activity, right? That's they're submitting interconnection Caesar studies, things like that. Even if not all of those projects work out, just that kind of hockey stick growth that we're seeing in that early project pipeline is really exciting for us. We've been kind of knowing that it's coming, over the last couple of years. But that said, the market is very much focused on that large utility scale front of meter. And there's not really there's not market activity in the smaller scale behind the meter kind of building integrated battery market yet. There is a little bit. The most significant market there was, or the most significant market activity there was a portfolio of kind of pilot projects that were funded as a post-Hurricane Sandy effort under the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery, which is now something else. But that was maybe a dozen or so projects that were being sited at various, mostly public building sites. And those serve as, really good kind of initial case studies, but those projects were very complicated. They were very bespoke. They took a very long time. They're very expensive. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. The whole market has gone from very, very individualized, bespoke, complicated, kind of piecing these projects, these installations together from, different parts. And it's moving towards that standardization, standardized products that are more like, off the assembly line, and you just kind of hook it up and go forth and be merry. But we're in that transition right now, going from that complicated, expensive bespoke to the more standardized. We're in the middle of it right now. There's a couple of things that I want to plug during my time up here with the fellow panelists. So the first one of those is a hugely important sort of initial step into the New York City market for any battery project. Really boils down to the battery product itself that has to get a what's known as a certificate of approval, COA, from FDNY. That is a really in-depth product equipment review by the FDNY that basically looks under the hood and determines, is this product built the way it, sort of purports to be? Are there, certain considerations that, this product is going to need to abide by in order to ensure that it is, done in a fire-safe way? And what are going to be its unique product-specific installation requirements? That is a really big step. It's a big, sort of first gateway to get into the New York City market. We want to encourage dozens more product providers to submit their products to obtain this, to submit for the COA review and approval. That would go a really long way towards opening up more of that market activity. And I will also say, as a sort of a second, thing coming down on the horizon, is that the regulatory framework for governing, the physical installation process for batteries in New York City has been built up in pieces over time. Nobody can, sort of pre-think through every single aspect of this really complicated technical problem of, figuring out how to do installations in a place like New York City all at once. So we started off with with a rule, New York City rule, capital R, adopted in 2019, and that governed outdoor installations. That's still in play now. That's what regulates the outdoor battery systems that are going in right now. And then in 2022, there was a fire code update, and that included the adoption of a chapter specifically devoted to fire code regulations for indoor battery systems. So you had the outdoor, then you had a fire code indoor. And now what's on the horizon is the third. There's also been a lot of updates in the zoning treatment for all batteries across, kind of across the board. That was a really big sort of piece of the puzzle also coming into, coming into play. And the fourth biggest one, I would say, is a forthcoming Department of Buildings energy storage rule that's going to kind of complete the, what's the way of saying trifecta, but for four things. That's going to complete that for, and kind of finish putting the last puzzle piece in place for indoor battery. And really that's going to have the biggest impact on those behind-the-meter smaller systems as well. That rule went out for public comment in January. We're really excited that it seems likely that it will be, put into effect by the end of this year. That's really going to change the landscape for, in moving towards that more standardized handling of battery systems now.
Thanks, Danielle. So, Molly, there's a lot of change that has happened over the last decade, and it's pretty exciting. Can you talk a little bit about what innovative battery technologies are emerging, that are likely to be options for owners in New York City?
Yeah, totally. And thank you for having me. At the Clean Fight, we work with growth stage energy storage companies across both hardware and software. So we've been really at the forefront of seeing what new tech is really ready for mass deployment, which is very exciting. Just a couple of things that we've seen in our portfolio of companies that we've worked with, as well as some of the pipeline as we've recruited for new programs, have been a couple of things that have piqued my interest. So definitely next-gen lithium-ion systems that have fire prevention, thermal runaway prevention, integrated into the batteries themselves. So that could be at the cell level, that could be at the pack level. There are numerous innovators that are active in New York State that are really trying to tackle that problem. We're also seeing non-lithium solutions, and I think a couple of years ago that felt a little bit further away, but now it is starting to come to bear at a level where we can see that be fully commercialized. That could be like a sodium-ion battery, it could be a zinc-based battery. Those materials are very sustainable and inherently fire safe as well. So there's some benefit there too. One of the companies we've worked with in our portfolio that is manufacturing here in New York is Urban Electric Power, and they have really endeavored to kind of look at more of these behind-the-meter applications moving forward, which is really exciting. Something really cool that we've seen the past couple of weeks is more of a plug-in solution approach. So that is really plugging in behind the meter into a regular outlet. So we've seen this at the resi level, and wanted to share an example from Con Edison, and I think this pilot has gone live today, actually, which is really exciting. But basically, you can use portable batteries as long as, I think it's less than 2 kilowatts, and you don't need to go through the FDNY COA process that Daniela outlined. And so there is a pilot with Con Edison that is using portable batteries that are UL certified for portable batteries, a really high standard. That's what is in all of our cell phones, et cetera. And they're pairing that with HVAC systems that have that accordion siding to use that as demand response revenue. And so that is, I think that it's called the Responsible Grid pilot, but that is an oversubscribed pilot that is just starting. So it's really cool to see these new behind-the-meter applications starting to crop up a little bit. I think thermal storage is also an area that is has just become mature enough to really get moving, like phase change materials, plugging into thermal networks and district heating applications as well. So really excited to see all of those come to bear over the past couple of years, and now they're ready for game time.
Do any of you want to add to the conversation on technology? Nope. All right, so Claudia, Molly just mentioned that there are rules at DOB, there are rules in Daniela also. Over the course of the last decade, those have been developed at different points of time. There was also rulemaking for Local 97 around energy storage, distributed energy resources that are clean, so owners that start to go down that path can get deductions, approach their GHG coefficients slightly differently. You helped write those rules. And what are the policy changes that we still need to see?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's been so much progress, but of course there's always still a lot more to do. But it's an exciting time for energy storage. There's lots of things moving forward kind of in parallel. So Daniela did a great job summarizing the kind of progress we've made already with the FDNY rule and code update. We had zoning for carbon neutral, which was a huge win to allow more projects to be cited as of right, the DOB rule. And I think all of that has really put New York City on the map as a national leader for energy storage permitting, and also a national leader on energy storage safety, on battery safety. And New York City has been really influential in the development of the state fire codes, which are currently under review and hopefully will be adopted this summer, fingers crossed. In terms of permitting at the New York City level, I think Daniela mentioned the importance of the certificate of approval process, so getting more projects or products to go through that process and also standardizing it. So this is an issue not just with the COA process, but with other permitting processes, just the way to make sure that they're consistently applied. I think there's a lot of times when you go through the process as a developer and you hear something from one FDNY unit that then the next FDNY unit says something different, or that's different from what DOB says. And so there's a lot of internal standardization that I think needs to happen to really clarify what the AHJs, the authorities having jurisdiction, are looking for. And some of that can be done in the form of clearer checklists, which we've sort of started to move in the right direction of, as well as just broader education. So I think we're moving from the bespoke pilot stage into, okay, if we're gonna scale this up, we need to make this a lot more standardized than it has been. On the Local Law 97 front, we're similarly kind of moving from what should the policy be to how do we actually implement it successfully. And I think a lot of people are not aware of what benefits are available to use energy storage as part of your Local Law 97 solution set. So I guess I'll just summarize at a high level. There's three main tracks that building owners or property managers can think about when they're evaluating energy storage opportunities. The first that we've sort of talked a bit about on this panel so far is behind the meter, so integrating batteries, on site, directly interconnected into the building's electric system, and really serving as an on-site load modifier behind the meter. That can be a great solution. If it's less than 2 kilowatts, then that's great. If you need bigger than 2 kilowatts, it can be kind of complicated from a permitting perspective, and obviously it comes with a lot of upfront costs and construction disruption. Another option is if you happen to manage properties that have a lot of outdoor space or have a parking lot or a place to put battery outside, the permitting process is much more streamlined because we've just had more projects go through that path. If you host a battery using that space, so you would basically lease your extra space to a battery developer, a third party, to develop a battery and connect that front of the meter to the grid, then you don't have to deal with any of the issues of interconnecting directly to your building, and you still can take a deduction on your Local Law 97 reported electricity emissions. So that's an additional hosting benefit. And then the third path is the probably easiest path of all, which is subscribing to an off-site energy storage system located within the 5 boroughs. So as long as there is a project within New York City that's providing grid services, you can count the emissions benefits that battery generates as your own in your Local Law 97 emissions reporting. So I think in terms of implementation, we definitely have a long way to go in terms of educating building owners and property managers about that opportunity, educating the private sector about the business opportunity that building a storage project in the city can provide with respect to Local Law 97 subscriptions. And then I guess kind of echoing the last panel, which was fantastic, I think there's a way to include energy storage in sort of the broader decarbonization and can kind of build energy storage into the services that it provides as part of the accelerator, or as part of the potential program previously contemplated on the last panel. So that way, energy storage isn't always kind of thought of last.
Great, thank you. So John, we just heard about a pilot program at Con Ed, and can you talk to us a little bit more about the programming for energy storage, not just batteries, but across the board that's happening at Con Edison, and how is that going to change what are the offers for building owners?
Great, thank you. So the New York City grid, let me start by saying the electrical grid is probably the most complex machine ever made. And our grid here in New York City is one of, if not the most complicated electrical grids that exist. So all that is to say is we do lots of pilots, we demo lots of technology, we follow what's in the industry, but in many cases we need things that work for us that are unique here in New York City. So Molly mentioned one pilot, we have several of those. As far as programs available, there are some technology agnostic programs that I'm sure a lot of folks in the room are familiar with. So there's our existing demand response programs that have various flavors, which are really looking at summer peak load shaving. We've got in areas that are going to experience load growth, our non-wires programs. And then we've got some solar and storage specific programs for under 5 megawatts. We have our value of DER retail tariff, where you can avoid going to the wholesale market and get compensated directly from the utility. And then for larger than 5 megawatts, we support wholesale market participation. We've also seen the NYSO, the New York ISO for the wholesale energy market has adopted their aggregation model. So aggregations of DER or demand response of any size can now participate directly into that market. And then I think forward-looking, again, as we think about the transition and how the grid changes, we will be rolling out more programs. There's an ongoing Grid of the Future proceeding for New York State now that's thinking about this. So right now, our focus for our programs is primarily on peak load shaving, which is the summer. I can see that eventually getting to winter peak shaving, and then eventually programs that are much more dynamic. So similar to the wholesale market, whereas we are leveraging technologies to help us be more flexible with how we manage the grid.
That's awesome. Daniela, I wanted to ask you a tough question. So a little more than a month ago, our Staten Island Borough President announced that his office will file a lawsuit to ban energy storage from residential areas and near schools in Staten Island. There's some similar activity happening on Long Island, and when we look statewide, there's a lot of misinformation out there. What would you share to help the opposition understand the role of storage in our future grid?
Sure. I would kind of boil it down to a couple of most key kind of messaging points, I guess. One is that there is a reason why opposition started to bubble up among energy storage projects around the state. And I don't know how many of you are aware that there was a short period of time in the summer of '23, I believe, where there were 3 different battery fires, all in the span of about 2 months. They were not, like hugely impactful, serious incidents. Nobody got hurt, thankfully. They were manageable, but that's not good. We don't want that. And so I want to kind of make a plug for the fact that a lot of times we'll hear grumbling from the folks who are trying to get through this very it is a complicated process to get through the installation requirements, right, for these projects. But it's better to do it right ultimately. Get it right the first time. So I really just give such a shout out and applause to the folks within FDNY and Department of Buildings who are really trying so hard to get the regulations right, and better to be a little bit overcautious than a little bit undercautious. And ironically, what we're a little bit seeing now is that say FDNY will be participating at like a public forum type of thing, and now they're getting yelled at from both sides, right? The installers are saying, too strict, it's making it too hard for us to do these projects. And now they're hearing from some of the constituents who are just not aware of so much behind the scenes work and effort that's gone into shaping the regulations. They're saying, well, you're not regulating these enough. These batteries are too risky, they're untested and all that stuff. And that is the misinformation that's out there, because so much of this work is invisible. When I first started in my role at Sustainable Communities in 2017, I was pulled into weekly engagements with FDNY and representatives from Department of Buildings, along with various guest subject matter experts who would be participating and contributing their expertise as the New York City AHJs literally hammered out a framework for handling battery installations from installation requirements all the way through installation and the life cycle regulation, all the way to the end of doing even the disposal, the decommissioning and the disposal correctly. That was about a year-long process. And I was a deer in headlights. This was brand new to me. It was definitely learning by being, thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool. And it's so much information. It's hard, you can't expect people to keep up with that, with how much has gone into it. But communicating, the fact that what a good job our New York City AHJs have done in doing this. I think that's really, really one key thing. I want to give them the props that are due. And then another sort of key point is that regulations work. There's a reason why our laptops and cell phones are not catching on fire all the time. It was huge news when some Samsung product a bunch of years ago was catching on fire, and those were quickly pulled off the market. And they're not in the news. If if the fire risk or frequency of problems is happening in our cell phones and laptops at the same rate that we've seen in the unregulated, or certainly not nearly as well regulated, e-bikes and scooters, we would have some problems. People wouldn't sleep with their phones right next to their night table. So those are, I would say, a couple of really the key ones.
Great, thank you, Daniela. So it sounds like regulation is doing its best to keep up with technology. There's some things are changing quickly, though, and I think the viability is becoming more promising as a technology, with these changes in battery chemistry, a lot of research going into how we're sourcing those materials. We're eventually going to need some kind of recycling infrastructure. There'll be new markets. And Molly, you're spending a lot of time working with battery providers, storage providers. What are you hearing from them as the major hurdles that we still need to overcome? And I think we've heard from two panelists that have said New York City is leading. We had a conversation about where else can we look to find ways to help us move forward faster. But it looks like everybody's looking to New York City. So
Yeah,
tell us more what you're seeing.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm happy just to build on some of your points, Daniela. I think there are a ton of challenges that are facing new innovators across the board. So whatever I say is going to be a subsampling of truly so many things that they're facing as they come into new markets. And actually, we put together, in partnership with New York Best, a framework on our website that identifies challenges and solutions that are facing both innovators and developers in the space. So feel free to take a look because it's pretty robust. But just at a high level, I think we have the most stringent kind of certification and regulatory process in New York City, and that requires upfront capital to go into certification for tech providers. And the interesting thing is that often technology is outpacing regulation to a certain extent. And so really, some of the new tech providers that have engineered out thermal runway from their technology, they still need to put up the $30,000, $50,000 towards the same UL certification that a lithium-ion system would go against in order to have an apples-to-apples comparison. And that's not changing anytime soon. And I actually think it creates more of a competitive edge for these providers, because if you're able to get through the FDNY process, you really can get market share quite quickly here. There's only a short list of technologies that have been approved here in the city. And so if you can make it through that, you can really capitalize on the market opportunity here. But also, because FDNY is leading at a national level on fire safety and firefighting for battery fires, they are the AHJ that every other AHJ calls when something goes wrong. And so they are real heroes in this work. And so I think increasingly across the state and even nationally, we're going to see more of this reliance on these certifications to be able to have that confidence from communities to be safely deploying these systems. So it's both a challenge and a huge opportunity, I think, and I think that is par for the course with a lot of parts of getting these projects done. But a couple of other things, I think on the financing front, we're in New York City. Real estate is obviously very expensive here, and there is a lot of competing demands for space. And that means there's competing demands for sites. So I think when we're looking at more of the smaller scale systems outside of the front of the meter systems, it's finally this market opportunity is starting to come to bear. Really, financiers are unable to finance smaller projects unless they're able to bundle them into a broader swath. And that's really hard for a tech provider that's starting to get their first project done here. The good news is that we also are in the capital center of the world as well. So our capital stack here is really well developed. We have amazing green banks like the New York Green Bank and NYC here. We have philanthropy at the table. We have infrastructure, dev cap providers, all in city limits, which is really exciting. And I think bringing all those folks together will really start to unlock these new projects to get started so that they can bring down those transaction costs and start to de-risk the development process a little bit more. I think also the market signals have, in part of NYSERDA's implementation plan and roadmap process for the state, we're starting to see new opportunities for different types of customer segments, which is really exciting. And I think we're at an interesting moment, really, where we can see state incentives coming together, utility incentives coming together, and then local laws at the city level really making the business case a lot stronger for storage than it ever has been before. So it's a really exciting time.
Thanks, Molly. And I want to go with one more moderator question, Claudia, and you teed it up, Molly. So can you talk a little bit more about those incentives, Claudia, and how do owners access those? There's a retreat at the federal level. There's still stuff out there. What can owners take advantage of?
Yeah, happy to. Oops. And it's a really exciting time. Oh, sorry about that. For energy storage in New York in particular, because New York State is still very committed to moving forward with the incentive program. So last summer, the Public Service Commission approved $1.7 billion in incentives for energy storage through the 6 gigawatt roadmap. So NYSERDA has since taken the pen and developed a bunch of implementation plans on how it's going to use and distribute those funds. So it's happening across 3 different size portfolios. So we've got the residential storage, which is usually 1 to 4 family homes, retail storage, which can either be on-site providing services directly to a larger building, or it can be off-site directly interconnecting front of the meter to the grid. And then the bulk storage program, which is intended to support energy storage projects that are more like power plant size connecting to the transmission grid. So really exciting times. This month is really like the month for energy storage incentives to be hitting the streets after many years of anticipation. So for residential and retail, those will be in the format of $ per kilowatt hour upfront incentives. The retail storage applications are open now through June 10th, and then on June 10th, those close and the residential storage applications open. So those are very exciting. And then the bulk storage program, less relevant to building owners, but just FYI, those are not in the $ per kilowatt hour upfront incentive format. Those are actually index storage credits. So the size of the incentive changes over time as the projected revenue from the wholesale markets changes. So it kind of provides a hedge for energy storage developers to be able to finance larger projects. One thing that is currently open for, as part of an RFI that is closing, I believe, this week, is NYSERDA is asking for feedback on the design of its inclusive storage incentive, which is a really exciting program to make energy storage more available for disadvantaged communities and otherwise historically marginalized communities. So there's even bigger adders available for projects that will benefit either homes within disadvantaged communities, if you have residents that are less than 80% area median income, or if you're supporting critical facilities like hospitals, affordable housing, et cetera. And I think in the RFI, they're asking for feedback on how to define what counts as a critical facility. But those dollar amounts are pretty significant. For the inclusive storage incentive for residential, I think it's like $425 per kilowatt hour. So that would basically be enough to cover the entire system. And then you still have the cost of insulation, et cetera. So that's really exciting new development that will be available this year that building owners should definitely be aware of. And then I guess I'll just close with a nod to the future. So the Public Service Commission is currently undergoing a proceeding known as Grid of the Future to think about how do we better incentivize and value and compensate flexible resources as we shift from a unidirectional grid of the past where you're just having, power plants produce power, it travels in one direction to consumers who consume the power, to now a much more bi-directional. Customers are providing power not just through solar, but also through energy storage, through aggregated demand response, through vehicle to grid. And our regulatory framework is really just not set up for that at this point. So the Grid of the Future proceeding is an opportunity to revisit that. So we'll definitely be very involved in that proceeding. And I think going forward, it's an opportunity to even better capture and the value of energy storage and incentivize it going forward.
Thank you, Claudia. So I'm going to go to one of our audience questions. See which one of you wants to chime in, but the one that's most popular is asking about what's the impact with embodied carbon, with acidification, precious metals, circularity. I think battery developers are thinking about these things, but what do you guys see in your work?
I can start. So this is absolutely critical to us. We don't want to be, gaining environmental justice wins here by displacing and causing environmental injustices elsewhere. So thinking about how do we create a sustainable and humane supply chain is one of our main pillars of equitable energy storage. It is a very challenging thing to do, especially for a state-focused organization, because so much of it is regulated at the federal level. And right now, we don't have great traceability standards in place to even understand where the different components of an energy storage product are coming from, because there's so many different suppliers along the entire supply chain. So one thing that we know we are in favor of is having more manufacturers and more pieces of the supply chain puzzle locate in New York. It's a really exciting way to bring the jobs and economic benefits of the clean energy transition more locally, and it also brings those suppliers under local legislation that has labor provisions and has sustainability standards in a way that, manufacturing them abroad, it's much difficult to control. New York Best has also been involved in a public-private partnership at the federal level called LiBridge, which is basically working to develop better traceability standards, originally with the intent of how do you comply with the domestic content component of the investment tax credit at the federal level. Obviously, there's a lot of turmoil at the federal level right now, so it's not totally clear what will happen with that work under this administration, but it's definitely something that we are advocating hard to continue.
Thank you. The next two questions that came in from the audience are both related to how the code has been changing, how the regulations, the rules have been changing, and I think you've answered it in part, but what are the code challenges that might remain now that, Molly, you've mentioned there's new lithium-ion technology that's sort of solved the thermal runaway problem. Are there still hurdles in the way?
I'm happy to jump in on that. Just making sure that's working. So I'll come in with the, as much as I love batteries and I'm excited about them, there's always but. So I wouldn't call it Debbie Downer. I'll call her Brass Tacks Betty. There is a lot to still do. And so I'm going to use this as an opportunity for plugging an effort that Claudia and I are both involved in and kind of helping to co-steer. And it's an industry-led, all-volunteer task force that is focused specifically around unlocking the kind of what we're calling batteries for buildings, and that's that medium range size behind-the-meter battery market that is, aimed at providing demand management and, just energy kind of related services behind the meter to specific buildings and sites, as opposed to the, larger utility scale front of meter. There's a lot still to just dig in and figure out how is that going to go and where are the, sticking points and, what do we kind of need to be preparing for, or aware of what kinds of informational needs are out there in the market, what kind of education is going to be the most useful and impactful. So this, our task force is a work in progress. It's based on just people contributing their brain power. So if anybody is interested, we're always looking for just a wide range of perspectives to for you to add to our understanding of how this unlocking this market. We need to know how those different pieces, are impacted by and will impact, all the different stakeholders who are involved in a battery project. So please reach out to either Claudia or myself. Definitely, we're very happy to have anybody who's interested. And then, as far as the original question was kind of policy developments that need to happen. I think that, as we don't know what we don't know, obviously, as technology changes, as I mentioned earlier, the first energy storage rule from for the fire department angle, from the fire code angle, was put in place in 2019. That's 6 years ago. Is life, generations, right? In terms of battery, how quickly battery technology and everything's evolving. So, to some degree, there's just going to have to be a little bit of learning by doing, that as new technologies come down the pipeline that just were never even conceived of at the time, they will have to kind of evolve and adapt. So we're always encouraging folks to kind of get their ideas in early, with have conversations with the agencies. They're technology nerds too, and this is a lot of this is has been new to them as well. So they're adapting and evolving to the changes in the marketplace just as much as everybody else is. There are formal mechanisms to be able to do things like that. Like, for example, there's this extremely arcane, buried, option available for submitting what's called a concept proposal document to FDNY. And it's exactly, self-explanatory, the name concept proposal. You're literally submitting an application for a conceptual idea that you have for a project, and you're able to get it to FDNY. It's a few $100 application fee, but then you're able to really get their best thinking back on how this technology or this project would be treated, what kinds of other things you might have to do in order to get that product or project kind of through the approvals, and it's just you're able to kind of have that exchange in this like a formal way, and initiate that kind of communication and relationship with the entities that will be regulating this. And the more communication, the more exchange of information and ideas with them, and the earlier that can happen, the better.
Thank you, Daniela. I hope that everybody has found this as exciting as I did after I started having this conversation, and I think that maybe Urban Green is going to continue this conversation, as there's a lot of change happening right now, really exciting things happening at the city, at the state level, and I wish that we had more time. But we have run out of time, and I just want to thank all of you for being here today, for helping me to, have an optimistic perspective on the battery market again. And thank you for giving us this forum today, Urban Green. Thank you.